but everyone wonders and tries to figure out who can crash the party, and we wonder all the time. Very few ever do, but tell us what you've learned.
Well, one of the things that we wrote about was who might be one of the biggest surprises. And I thought NC State needs some attention as a dark horse, because if you look in the ACC, and as you can tell behind me, I'm in ACC country, I'm in Blacksburg right now. I was hanging out with Brent Pry at Virginia Tech a little bit. But in ACC country, there are high expectations for Dave Doran. This might be arguably the best team that he has coming back, and it's wide open. We don't know how good Clemson is going to be. We'll find out on October 1st when NC State and Clemson play who's going to be the true leader in terms of the Atlantic Division. And of course, you can't forget about Wake Forest. But nationally, no one's expecting much out of NC State. Maybe they should. Can they win the ACC? That's obviously the first step.
Yeah, I don't want to be a hater on NC State because their program is pretty phenomenal, but it just seems like every time that program gets close to just breaking the door down, they blow a game. Last year, the perfect example. They've got one of the best players. They may have the best player in the draft, according to some of the experts that we have spoken to. But what makes you think they can get over the hump? I know you said surprise team. There's a difference, I'm sure.
No, you're true. Well, look, that's something that they have to prove, because you're 100% right, whether or not they can actually do that. Paul, I'm a little bit concerned right now because the lights in this room are slowly going off. So if I go into the dark, that means NC State has absolutely no shot, and everything I said goes out the window, right? True story. But one of the things I think is the fact that Clemson is not the Clemson that we're used to. They have a lot of staff changes. So to me, when I look at the ACC, and I'm talking about the Atlantic Division right now, because I think Pitt, and I've spoken to Pat Narduzzi last week, is a very good team. He's doing a lot with a little there, and that's not a knock on Pitt. It's just a fact that they're not getting a lot of the same players as the Alabamas and Ohio States of the world, right? So I think the ACC is just wide open, and this is their chance, if they can do it, to knock the door down, because they have the talent in place.
Can't those ACC schools pay the light bill? Anyway, I didn't mean to get into that. Heather, you're at Virginia Tech. I am curious, though, because that's a program that I think all of us would have bet incorrectly on Justin Fuente, who followed Beamer, and now a new leadership in charge. What is your sense on that campus, which loves college football, had a big upset at the beginning of the last season but couldn't finish the deal?
He has a lot of work to do. He knows that, and so much of it has to do with recruiting, and we talked a lot about that in his office upstairs. And it's just the fact that they've got to recruit here within a 5-hour radius, and I think that started to fall off the radar a little bit here at Virginia Tech. He wants to bring it back. I mean, this is a guy, Brent Pry, who really cut his teeth here in Blacksburg. He worked under former defensive coordinator Bud Foster. He knows the school. He's passionate about it. He knows what it can be. I mean, when you turn in here, you turn on Beamer Way, right? There is a lot of history and tradition, and quite frankly, one of the reasons I haven't been here in a while is because they haven't been not only in the national picture but the playoff picture, and so he wants to get this back to where that was and reestablish its prominence. He told me that they haven't been to Michael Vick's high school in a long time, so those are the kind of bonds that they need to reestablish with recruits and ties within the area, and so it's a lot of work, a rebuilding process, but his expectations are high that ultimately they'll be able to get there.
Heather, we know the big names, and we talk about that all the time with you. But as you comb the country this time of the year, you mentioned NC State. What other teams intrigue you out there?
I'm very curious about Utah and the Pac-12. You know, everybody's entranced by the shiny object at USC, and I get it. Lincoln Riley's going to make a difference out there eventually. This year, I'm not so sure if it's going to happen immediately, but I think that to be fair, the attention should be on Utah. I talked to Kyle Whittingham. He's a veteran coach in that league, and he told me that 70 of his scholarship players are going to be underclassmen. And, Paul, you watched that Rose Bowl. It didn't come out the way Utah would have liked, but man, what effort, what heart, and that certainly carries over. So I think Utah-USC is going to be one of the biggest games of the year. And of course, how do all the other new coaches do? I mean, looking at Florida and LSU throughout the SEC, a lot of turnover. I think those are going to be interesting programs to watch as well. And of course, Notre Dame, right? How do they do in the Freeman era? Young coach, expected to win a national title right away. Is that fair? I'm not sure. The pieces in place. He made some really good hires, and especially with defensive coordinator Al Golden coming in, I think that they've got a really good defense to build on. So there are a lot of storylines throughout college football, a lot of teams to watch and pay attention to. But look, I've got Ohio State #1 preseason, and at the end of the day, I think we're circling back to a lot of the same names.
I'm tempted to really push you on that, but it is only late March, so there is time. But what do you see about Ohio State that would intrigue you more than the obvious Alabama?
Alabama, that's a good one too. You can
Really?
certainly make the case for Alabama. It's a coin toss. The reason I like Ohio State, I'm going to go back to that Rose Bowl and the way they won that game without so many of the players that were missing in that game, and then the hire of Jim Knowles. And back to your previous question, when I mentioned Utah, Oklahoma State is another one to watch. But the reason I mentioned Utah ahead of them is because Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy lost Knowles to Ohio State, which is one of the best, albeit probably one of the quietest hires of this offseason. And so that was one of the question marks Ohio State had last year, was defensively. I think they answered it with him.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming, sports, and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.